Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. We're still working on chapter 10. I don't think we'll get it done today, but we're getting there. All right, so we were in the little section called the group marriage commune. We didn't get too far into it because I ran out of time, but we're going to get through it today, I promise. All right, so when in June 1968, Manson hand-selected a number of his group to accompany him to LA, Rose may have feared that the year-long party was drawing to a close. He invited the remaining women to move into his Haight-Ashbury home, where he could tend to their needs until Manson summoned them. That is weird. That's weird. It was then that some of the girls headed to Ukiah for their ill-fated recruitment effort. When they landed in jail, Rose jumped at the chance to rescue them. As David Smith described the episode in Love Needs Care, Rose outdid himself, visiting the girls daily and fetching candy and cigarettes for them. It sounds like he was under their spell, for sure. Who was under how do you say that? Who was under whose spell at this point? It's hard to even say. I don't know. Mary Bruner, the mother of Manson's newborn son, was still lactating. The other girls made a habit of going naked. This is gross, guys. And let's just say getting milk out of her. This rattled the jail staff, but Rose vouched for the girls. Outside the jail, he kept busy by consulting with lawyers on courtroom strategy and preparing his testimony as a character witness. All the while, he was living on money funneled to him by David. When the case was resolved, the girls made tracks for the Spawn Ranch, not wanting to keep Manson waiting. By now, it seemed Rose couldn't bear to part with them, and he elected to go too. And then he stayed with them for 4 months. So this dude has a house of his own up near San Francisco, and he leaves everything behind to go live on Spawn Ranch with the girls for 4 months. That is weird. Was this a business trip or a vacation? It's up for debate just how totally Rose succumbed to the family's power. Judging from the published accounts of his time with them, he was more an enabler than a blind devotee. Somewhat opaquely, David wrote that Rose was both a sympathetic cousin and a sociologically oriented participant observer in the strange communal phenomenon. So is he enjoying himself or is he doing research? It's hard to tell, maybe both. Roger Smith had used the term participant observer too for his ARP. He endorsed looking the other way when one's subjects broke the law. Well, we've seen that over and over, right? Did the same laxness apply to Rose at the Spawn Ranch? David provided varying and sometimes contradictory accounts of Rose's role in the family, and he lost his temper when I tried to set the record straight. The first time we spoke, he admitted that Al became enraptured with their philosophy and he traveled with them. Rose dropped acid with the family, Smith said, and then 6 of the girls just effed his brains out and he saw God. He borrowed some money from me and he didn't pay it back, and it turned out he gave it to Charlie. So it was very weird. Other sources also remembered Rose having some kind of ecstatic sexual encounter with the family. But at some point, the appeal of the group faded for him and he left. He came back, Smith said. I can't really say he got kicked out. He just said he was no longer part of it. That is so odd. And yet, when I revisited the matter with Smith a few years later, he said, I don't know if Al went to Spawn Ranch. When I reminded him that he'd said otherwise, he made a grudging concession. He was with them for 4 weeks max. Once again, if you don't lie, you don't have to keep your story straight. And remember, like I said before too, a little lesson from Judge Judy. Okay, so I tracked down Rose himself, who told me in a phone call that he was at the ranch for probably 3 or 4 months. Rose was shocked that I wanted to talk to him. Only one other journalist had been in touch, and I found him nonchalant about his time with the family. More than either of the Smiths, he came across as mild, somewhat naive, and unassuming. His memories of the late 60s had their edges smooth like stones in the sea. Well, your memories are going to be a little blunted when you were high most of the time as well, I contend. Of course, he remembered the girls. They had a level of self-confidence and dynamism that was pretty amazing, he said. And they had some skills that he enjoyed, it sounds like. Oh, goodness. They could walk into stores and get checks cashed without ID, okay? And he remembered the power that Manson exuded, recalling a man whose raw charisma was by then tainted with egotism and racism. Still, he obeyed Manson, sincerely feeling that his destiny was going with Charlie and the girls. Sounds like it was a good thing that it didn't. Good for him, anyways. He added, "We were all pretty impressionable, very idealistic. Charlie convinced me I didn't need glasses, so I stopped wearing them. He'd have me drive the bus up and down the LA freeway. I really had to strain." Oh my gosh. So he's driving a bus down the freeway, unable to see because Manson told him he did not need to wear glasses. That is not good. What? It's just hard to understand the mentality. But I guess if you're high, you're more susceptible to things. Or you just don't care. One or the other, maybe both. What had finally made him leave the Spawn Ranch was an incident in which Manson picked up a prostitute from the freeway and paraded her in front of his followers, saying that he wouldn't have sex with her because she wouldn't give him head. Sorry, guys. And I just saw that as such an abuse of the power that he had. It was late autumn 1968 when Rose returned to the Haight. He moved in with Roger and his wife Carol in Tiburon and assisted in writing up 2 studies. The first was Roger's ARP dissertation. The second was called The Group Marriage Commune, a case study, co-authored with David Smith, the first ever scholarly study of the Manson family. Might probably be interesting to read that article. David and Rose believed they had a major research paper on their hands, bolstered by Rose's first-hand observations of the family. First published remarks about their study appeared 6 weeks after the family was charged with the murders. In a January 1970 interview Smith gave to Berkeley Barb and Alt Weekly. The front page story was headlined, "MD on Manson's Sex Life. Psychologist who lived with Manson family tells about commune." Smith discussed Rose's 4 months on the ranch, but he never indicated that his co-researcher had been a follower of Manson. Intentionally or not, Smith gave the impression that Rose's time with the family was part of a planned study. In fact, they decided to write about the family only after Rose left the commune, a point they'd finesse later. So basically, they're trying to make themselves look better than they actually were. Even though Rose was a psychologist referred to in the headline, he wasn't, of course, a real psychologist. Smith didn't let him do any of the talking. Instead, the reporter quoted portions of their scholarly paper, noting that Smith had pulled that article from the presses as soon as he learned that its subjects had been accused of mass murder. I was wondering about that. I'm like, they went to great lengths to hide their other research. Why would they put this out there? Because it would associate them with it as well. Their paper was eventually published in the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs in September 1970. It distanced the Free Medical Clinic from Rose's involvement with the family, and it never identified Manson by his last name, leaving the reader to make the connection. Participation in the commune at the time of Rose's involvement, read the introduction, was not associated with academic observation, and only after leaving the communal setting was thought given to description. Perhaps to exculpate the authors of any responsibility for the murders, it fudged the facts about Charlie, claiming that during our observation, he expressed a philosophy of nonviolence. LSD-induced psychedelic philosophy was not a major motivational force. That's called whitewashing history, if you ask this girl. Smith further downplayed the family's connection to the Free Medical Clinic by claiming that they only spent 3 months living in the Haight, during which their primary residence was a bus. In fact, the family lived in the Haight for more than a year, 2 blocks from the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, and after Manson took some followers to LA, The others moved into Rose's home. So that's a real whitewashing. They did not live there for just a little 3 months in a bus. It's much more extensive than that. Again, guilty consciences all around. The paper asked why these young girls were so attracted and captivated by a disturbed mystic such as Charlie. That was a great question. Past a certain point, it seemed Rose and Smith had no intention of answering it. Their paper detailed Manson's abusive, controlling methods, especially his sexual tactics, but it steered clear of their true area of expertise, LSD. Most egregiously, the paper was never updated to mention the Tate LaBianca murders, even though it was published a full year later. The defining event of the commune that Rose had infiltrated was nowhere to be found. So it's basically worthless if you ask me, because you're studying these people and then they go on to do something absolutely crazy, and that doesn't make it into your paper. A paper about behavior and what drugs do to your behavior. It's whitewashing. That's all there is to it. But whatever results they got from this study, they're just inaccurate. If you're tweaking the results to not make yourself look bad, then there's no point in doing a study to begin with. You're not going to be accurate about the outcomes. There's no point at all. Okay, the next section is called Extricated. Vincent Bugliosi didn't have much use for David and Roger Smith, and he had no use at all for Elle and Rose. Yeah, because they didn't lend themselves to his case. He didn't interview any of them for Helter Skelter. The book's one quote from Roger, "There are a lot of Charlies running around, believe me," was lifted from his short piece in Life magazine and framed to make it look as if Bugliosi had actually spoken to him. Same was true of David. Bugliosi used him to shrug off the implication that drugs enabled the family, quoting his assertion that sex, not drugs, was the common denominator. That quote is also pulled misleadingly from Life. David had written about Manson in the same issue. Given the realm of David Smith's research, I can't see how he really believed it. Other than that, the Smiths are absent from a story that might never have unfolded without them. That's just despicable. A book is one thing. Bugliosi had dramatic license. Maybe he just didn't think he could do justice to Manson's messy year in Haight-Ashbury. The trial was different. There, Bugliosi had to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Manson had enough control over his followers to get them to kill for him. He got former family members to testify in exchange for lighter sentences or drop charges. They provided vivid illustrations of Manson's domination, but he never called Roger or David Smith, two authorities who'd had almost daily exposure to Manson as he formed the group. It's hard to defend that. Trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, I don't know how you can. It's such a blatant omission. I guess lawyers only have to, they put in what's going to help their clients, but it's unconscionable to me. But I'm not a defense attorney trying to get somebody off. Actually, he wasn't the defense, he was the prosecutor. I don't know. They all had agendas. That's all I can tell you. They all had agendas. Once again, O'Neill, puts forth that Bugliosi was compromised, that he had a shady past, and that he was probably blackmailed into getting the outcome that the powers that be wanted in order to keep his own ugly past out of the news. Makes sense. It makes sense. Bugliosi's obsession with convicting Manson of conspiracy is the drama that drives Helter Skelter forward. To get Manson's guilty verdict, he had to demonstrate that Manson had ordered the murders and had enough control over the killers that they would do his bidding without question. And he was desperate to do this. He wanted witnesses who could say that Manson ordered or instructed anyone to do anything. He told his subordinates he had to prove domination. Roger Smith's and David Smith's life essays, the same ones Bugliosi quoted in Helter Skelter, came out a month before Bugliosi issued those marching orders to LAPD detectives. Within weeks, the Berkeley Barb and Los Angeles Free Press ran their front page stories featuring David Smith's discussion of Manson's indoctrination techniques, his process of reorienting new recruits, and his methods of disciplining family members. Now, I'd like to get my hands on that Life magazine article as well. It's probably difficult to find and very expensive. Bugliosi told the jury he'd proved that Manson was the dictatorial leader of the family. He was still calling witnesses to the stand when David Smith and Alan Rose's research paper came out, featuring such lines as Manson served as an absolute ruler. Yet the Smiths and Alan Rose told me that Bugliosi never got in touch with them, nor did anyone else from the LADA's office or the LAPD, which you'd think that would be strange because it seems like that would help his case, but not if it's going to shed light on nefarious federal programs that he may or may not have been blackmailed into protecting. I don't know. At least if you listen to Tom O'Neill's account, that's kind of his take on it. That's my take of what his take is of it. Despite their extensive knowledge of the family, the researchers never felt it was their duty to tell the authorities what they knew. If anything, David Smith feared testifying. I remember not wanting to be involved in that trial, he said. I felt that it would compromise our clinic. Is that his true motivation or just saving his own ass? Dr. Dernberg, the psychiatric director of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, when the family went there, followed the trial with mounting gloom as he realized that the whole San Francisco chapter of Manson's life was never going to come out. So why didn't he speak out? He told me it was as if Manson's stay up there had been extricated from the whole mass of data. I couldn't wrap my head around this. Why did Bugliosi ignore the most powerful prosecution evidence available? That's what I'm saying. It would help his case. Eyewitness testimony of Manson's control from his parole officer, a laureled medical researcher, and his assistant who lived with the group, each could have taken the witness stand independently, untainted by the suggestion of a plea arrangement or some type of deal. Yeah, they had nothing to gain or lose by it, really. Well, I guess they had things to lose. They could lose their clinic. I knew I'd have to ask Bugliosi about this eventually, but by that point I didn't trust him, and I wanted to box him in as much as I could. So I called on Stephen Kay, his co-prosecutor, to show him all the evidence of the Smiths' relationship with the family. I was on good terms with Kay, and I felt I could rely on him to be straight with me. At his office, I laid out the 2 life essays, which I knew Bugliosi had seen, plus press accounts of the Smiths and the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic research papers. The ones that didn't go missing. Kay read through them diligently. I've never seen these before, he said, his mouth open. I asked him if there was any way that Bugliosi had missed this stuff. Absolutely not, Kay said. Vincent read all the newspapers, every paper that came out. He subscribed to every paper. I know everything we had in the files, Kay went on, because we had a big file cabinet. I'd been through all that. He was positive they didn't have the Smiths' papers and articles there. If Bugliosi knew about them, he wasn't keeping them in the regular file. As far as Kay could recall, Bugliosi had never discussed the Smiths and Alan Rose, never entertained the idea of putting them on the stand, but Kay couldn't understand why. If we had an independent person like that, he told me, that's much better than calling a member of the Manson family. They would have been dynamite witnesses for us. Yeah, I mean, look at the family members. I mean, they were a big old box of craziness. And these guys had credentials and, published papers. They were legit. Why wouldn't you want someone legit there helping you prosecute your case? Doesn't make sense. Although the Smiths never appeared in the courtroom, there's a link between their research and Bugliosi's reasoning that continues to perplex me. In the first phase of the trial, prosecutor persuaded the jury that Manson had controlled his followers' every thought and action, full stop. In the trial's death penalty phase, he had to refine that argument somewhat. because the defendants could be sentenced to death only if they were acting under their own free will, Bugliosi claimed that regardless of their brainwashing, each of them had the independent capacity to murder. As Bugliosi explained it to me in our first meeting in 1999, Manson had somehow learned that a select few of his followers were willing and able to kill. Something in the deepest resources of their soul enabled them to do something that you and I cannot do. He said to me that day, there was something independent of Charles Manson that was coursing through them. These people not only killed for him, but they did it with gusto, with relish. 169 stab wounds, some of them post-mortem. What does that show? I think it's circumstantial evidence that some people have much more homicidal tendency than others. If you think back to those rats and what the drugs did to them and how violent it made them, it makes you really wonder if it's just their capacity to kill or if it's helped along by substances. It's those tendencies that recall David Smith's research. In a 1969 issue of the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, Smith wrote that the main purpose of his experiments with mice was to isolate the behavioral traits of the rodents that would kill after they'd been aggregated and injected with amphetamines, and then to modify their behavior using other drugs. And they made these parallels on their own. Like, they said that they wanted basically to use humans as lab rats, more or less. They didn't use those exact words, but that's what their research was about. 2 years later, writing of the study and its parallels to hippies in the Haight in Love Needs Care, Smith admitted it has yet to be determined whether amphetamines modify the personality primarily by biochemically altering the central nervous system or by reinforcing or precipitating long-term psychological tendencies. Strikingly, as Bugliosi had it, those psychological tendencies were exactly what Manson had learned to exploit. Yeah, he went after innocent, impressionable young girls that had trauma and, bad situations that they were running from. In the 2 years before the Manson murders, several papers in the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs and other periodicals looked at the increase of psychotic violence in the Haight and its link to amphetamines, LSD, and population density, just like those lab rats. Some made reference to a forthcoming paper by David Smith, Roger Smith, and Alan Rose on the role that personality factors played in users' reactions to drugs. Why was it that after just one experience with amphetamines or LSD, certain people experienced hallucinations that lasted for days or even weeks? Were the drugs to blame or some aspect of the user's psychology? Their paper promised to look into the phenomenon. But when the article, Acute Amphetamine Toxicity, finally appeared in the spring 1969 Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, both Roger Smith and Alan Rose had been removed as authors. Why? Because it might it be because it led back to the programs that they were doing, funded by certain federal agencies. Contradicting his later claim in Love Needs Care, David Smith wrote that he disagreed with the consensus that personality was the prime factor in differentiating between psychotic and non-psychotic reactions, arguing instead that in the drug subculture of the Haight-Ashbury, the prime determinants of psychotic versus non-psychotic reactions were immediate drug environment and experience of the user. More significant than the contradiction, I felt, was the article's obscurity. When the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic republished bound editions of all the journals 5 years later, acute amphetamine toxicity wasn't included in the collection. I wonder if that was just an oversight. I contend no. All the annotations referring to it in the other journal articles had been removed too, just as Manson's time in the Haight was extricated from the record at trial. The study by the two Smiths and Alan Rose, a study into the origins of the same psychological tendencies found in members of the Manson family, had disappeared. That is diabolical, and I'm sure, I don't know, like I said, were they trying to cover their own butts, or agencies that they were working for. Butts. Not that they have butts, but you know what I mean. It's pretty interesting. And it's so fascinating that this came out so much after the fact. I mean, I wonder if you can still get your hands on those original Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, because you would, like I said, I said earlier I would post the article if I could find it, but I have a sinking suspicion that I will not be able to find it because they whitewashed all this stuff out of the historical record. And I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think it was all innocent? I do not. It's just so nefarious and so unethical what they were doing to begin with. But if you look at the history of the CIA, which I'm fascinated by, there's a lot of unethical things going on, especially the MK Ultra programs, mind control, all the LSD stuff. I mean, it was just, I don't know how it was allowed to go on. I mean, I guess I'm coming at it from the ethical standpoint of how things are regulated now, which obviously wasn't the case then. And LSD was such an unknown that you really could say you're doing pharmaceutical research and probably no one would question it too hard. But it's crazy when you think about it, because this is so far away from what the original, true story or the official story that was put out by Bugliosi. It's just so different. And there's no way that he didn't, he was an intelligent lawyer. There's no way he didn't know about these guys, but it didn't, well, it would have helped his case. That's the thing. It's like, who, if anyone, was telling him not to include it? I don't know. I have my suspicions, and so does Tom O'Neill, but we haven't proved anything yet, and I'm not sure that it will get proven. But anyways, I'm gonna cut it off there. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We're getting close. One more part to chapter 10 and we'll be done with it, I promise. All right, you all take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.